Hey, what's up everybody? Thank you guys for coming back and watching another boring video. So, for today, I have a special guest, and her name is...
Verena!
Verena!
Yay!
We are here to talk about, again, living and working in Japan. Alright, well then let's get started. Alright, so go ahead and just kind of give a brief summary, I guess, of, how long have you been in Japan and what brought you here?
Okay, so this isn't actually my first time in Japan, but to start from the very beginning, I started to become interested in Japan when I was a kid. I guess it started a little bit with Sailor Moon, the classic for a lot of Japan fans, but at that time I didn't even know it was Japanese. I just thought like, oh, this is a cool, cartoon that doesn't really look like anything I've seen before. And then when I found out more about Pokemon and that there was like a lot of other cartoons that were this weird style, and then I discovered it was for Japan, it made me really interested in Japan and the Japanese culture and language, and it just snowballed until I was really obsessed, especially 14, 15, 16, I was really obsessed with Japan, and it was my big dream to go there. And after graduating high school, I got the chance to go to Kyoto, and I studied there for 9 months. I studied Japanese, and
For those of you who don't know, where's Kyoto?
in Japan, well, in southern Japan, kinda.
Insert image of Japanese map with Kyoto.
Bing. It's really beautiful. I do recommend going there, except that they're a bit right now, they have too many tourists. So even though I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in Japan, I still love it. They are a bit overcrowded right now, so I almost feel bad when I go there. But yeah, I had a great time there, and then I went back to Sweden, because I'm from Sweden. I'm half Swedish, half German. I studied marketing and some literature, and then I thought hey, I might as well go back to Japan, because I'm not fluent in Japanese yet, and I thought that maybe, apart from it being an adventure, it would be maybe easier, this sounds weird, but easier to find a job in Japan than in Sweden, simply because if you're in Japan and you know Japanese and English, it's a great asset. And
Yes.
Depending on what kind of job you want, I guess, but...
And depending on your level of Japanese.
Yes, that's very important. And I should also point out, I'm not fluent. I came back here, but this time in Yokohama. And
Yokohama!
yeah, it's a lovely city and a lot of people here, but not too many tourists. And that's also partly the reason I chose Yokohama, because I wanted a different experience than Kyoto. And I thought if I'm going to look for work, it would maybe be easier to be close to, first of all, to live in a big city, but also being close to Tokyo.
Yeah.
Without actually living in Tokyo, because Tokyo at that time scared me a little. And yeah, and I studied in Yokohama for a year, studied Japanese at a language school. Not fully fluent. I passed the N3 JLPT, Japanese language proficiency test. I almost passed N2 level, but I was 5 points short on kanji.
So she passed into.
Basically, I mean... If it just wasn't for kanji, but my speaking level is N2, I would say.
Yeah, you would put into on a resume.
I mean, yeah, if they don't ask me to see a certificate.
Yeah. But if having the interview in Japanese and talking to you, if you said into level, they would easily believe you.
Yeah, I think so. I got a job at...
So what was the first job you got?
Well, I mean, I did also some baito, some part-time job here in Japan, in Yokohama, and that was working at a hotel.
Okay.
But then when I got a proper full-time job, that was at a game company in Yokohama.
First, could you, I actually think your part-time job at the hotel could be interesting. So you did that while you were a student?
Yes, I did. I thought I also did a part-time job since when I was in Sweden with drawing my own webcomic. And I always got some money from there, but I thought it might be good to actually make a little bit more money. And so a friend of mine, or a classmate at my language school, he worked at this hotel. And this is a little bit weird, but he said that his boss specifically asked for good-looking white girls to work for the hotel, which is a little bit of a red flag, maybe.
What a compliment, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was just looking for people in general, but like, yeah, a good-looking white girl who is okay at Japanese. And I mean, the hotel's really close to where I live. And so I thought, like, that sounds weird, but I mean, it's convenient to go there. I might just check it out a little bit. And there were like several people from my language school that worked there.
Okay, cool.
And the thing is, I think they were like constantly, chronically short on staff. So even when I worked there, they were like, oh, do you know other people kind of like yourself who would be interested in working here? And the thing is, like, the boss, he was really charming and so on, but he always tried to get us to work like really long hours, sometimes longer hours than we would be legally allowed. Because I don't remember exactly how many hours per week we're allowed to work. I never worked that many hours to begin with, but like other people in my school who were more desperate for money, they would like do that. And like, I think one of the people that I know who worked there, he worked so much that it was basically, he got like a full-time wage like at the end of it, because he also would just sleep over sometimes in the hotel so he could continue working the next day. And I think my boss once, he was like, oh, hey Verena, do you want to like work this shift? It's like, I don't know how many hours, like 12 hours. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And he's like, oh, I'm going to sign you up. I'm like, no, I'm not. And he just did not accept it. So in the end, I just, I wrote to him a stern mail because he said like 12 hours. I said, no, I'm like maximum 8. And then he was like, okay. And then he just still sent me this mail that he had kind of signed me up for. I don't know if it was 10 or 12-hour shift, but and at that point I got pretty angry, and I'm Swedish, so I'm not really afraid of kind of standing up for myself. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. You're going to sign me up for 8 hours and that's it. And so he was like, okay, 9 hours.
And that's a very important point, because a lot of people who come over who maybe working their first job in Japan, or maybe their first time in Japan, or whether they're a student getting a part-time job, if you don't know the laws or what's allowed and what's not allowed, you can sometimes feel pressure or bullied into doing stuff that you don't want to do. And that is a prime example of a situation where your boss is trying to take advantage of you.
Yeah.
And I mean, luckily you were able to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
But some people maybe don't.
Yeah, and actually another girl from my same school, she told me that she was like, oh, I had this 12-hour, we were walking home the same time, and she said like, oh, I did this 12-hour shift the other day, and I said, why didn't you refuse? And she's like, what, you can't do that? I'm like, yeah, I did it, and she had no idea, and she was like kind of mind blown by the fact that I had said no. Like, because, yeah, for me it's like, this is a part-time job, I'm not going to like use up all my weekends working here when it's just, I'm not that short on cash. And also the main reason I came to Japan was to study Japanese. So like a part-time job should not come in the way of like you doing the thing you came to do here in the first place. If you're someone that needs money to even stay in Japan, I understand you may want to put in some more hours, but if it's a part-time job, like you need to really set also boundaries for yourself, because some people will just take advantage, and it's up to you to really draw a line.
Yeah. And that's something I talked about in one of my other videos about coming to teach in Japan, and the alternatives to just coming over to teach, where you can study like she did, and then get a part-time job if you want to also have that work experience. So do you know rules or laws or regulations about part-time jobs as far as requirements, like you being as a student, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do?
Oh yeah, actually our school had some rules. I'm not sure if they are like, if they had the rules just for the school or if it was with the law and so on. I just remember they told us that we're not allowed to work at host clubs and we're not allowed to do like work at massage parlors, giving massages to people, because I guess it's also kind of involved in the sex industry. Not all massage parlors are like that, but I think that also in Japan there are some places, I think it's everywhere in the world really, where there are some places where they offer massages, but also that it can be kind of a cover-up for a sex business.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess those were some of the rules.
Hey, sorry to cut in. So this is taken from Temple University's official website, and I believe it applies to all students. Students must not engage in any work related to the adult entertainment industry, including, but not limited to, nightclubs, hostess clubs, pachinko parlors, adult entertainment internet businesses, escort services, and telephone-based dating services. More specifically, you must not DJ, work as a doorman bouncer, create video films for nightclubs, or engage in any work activity, even dishwashing at a bar or nightclub. It is strictly prohibited.
And I want to stress, like, host clubs, they are not, I'm not sure if they qualify as sex industry, because I think there is a sexual aspect to it, but you don't go there to have sex with the hosts or hostesses.
Right. If you come to Japan and you want to go to one just for the experience, you can go one time, but be warned, you might get scammed out a lot of money, so it's best just to avoid that altogether.
Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding as if I have any experience, but I don't. But it's also like, I've just looked up documentaries and so on. It just seems really expensive. But I'm sure, like, if you have the money and you're interested, yeah, I guess. But I would recommend, if you're going to do anything like that, maybe a maid cafe would be cheaper. It's not, maid cafe, it's not a host club, but it's still kind of like, I think that some people kind of use maid clubs, like maid cafes a bit like host clubs, simply because, I don't know, I think from what I've heard, a lot of businessmen like to go to maid cafes.
Yeah, and you can pay, at maid cafes, you can pay to have your picture taken with, like, the server or staff or whatever. Yeah. If you're a guy, or even a girl, you're going to the opposite, going to a host club where there's guys. If you think you're going to find, like, some, like, relationship or something from these places, the whole business is just preying on your gullibility. Is that a word?
Yeah, that's a
like
thing.
of you know, falling for, like, them and their attention, and then you just paying more and more and more money.
Yeah, like the main attraction for both host clubs and maid cafes, they're very different establishments. I think, like, maid cafes are much more innocent, and a lot of tourists go there because it's a cute attraction. It depends on, like, what you make out of it. I think, like, a lot of the older businessmen that go there too, it's like the main attraction in both, they are the people working there, right? So you don't go to maid cafe necessarily, like, I think most people go there for the experience and, like, seeing the maids and so on, and a lot of maids work there.
Or just the cosplay, because like, could be maid cafes with, like, ninjas or, like, whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, like,
it's just the general term for it.
Yeah, but it's like the maids that work there, there are a lot of them do it because they want to create a fan base for themselves, because they're aspiring idols, actually. A lot of them, not all of them, but I actually have a Japanese friend who worked at a maid cafe, and when it's like the smaller places, like where she worked at, people just did it for fun, I think, but people who really want to become, like, idols, a lot of them will go to maid cafes in Tokyo to kind of start a fan base, and from there kind of rise to the top. So
topic we didn't think about exploring today, but there you go. So you had this experience at the hotel, and then after that you moved into a main full-time job working at a Japanese game company. Cool, right? Sounds like a dream job. Or is it?
It wasn't quite what I had expected. And I want to stress, like, it's a bit, I have to really balance it out how I talk about this company, because they were all really nice people. And I think it's super cool that they gave me this chance, because I think a lot of Japanese companies, they are not always super prone and, like, hiring foreigners. Some of them, like, really want to do it because it's like, oh, they know English and Japanese, that's cool. But a lot of people are like, mendokusai, like, that's a bit annoying, extra work and so on. So I have to, like, give kudos to this company, because in some ways they were really kind of old-fashioned and conservative, but they took a gamble and, like, hired me. I think that was pretty cool of them. But I do think that they kind of sugar-coated what I was supposed to do there.
What do you mean by that?
I think, like, when I was hired, they said that I would do all these cool things. I was hired to do marketing, which is the thing I had studied in university. I was supposed to also do, like, some game planning. They have this in Japan, they have a position called game planner, and that's something they don't have in foreign game companies. And so to sum it up, what a game planner is, it's someone who kind of just comes up with the idea for games and how they're supposed to work, and they write it down on paper, but they don't know, as a game planner in Japan, you don't need to know any programming and so on. It's a bit different. You just basically, and there's, like, no set education you need to have for it. You're just supposed to be, like, a creative social person.
Imagination.
Yeah, basically. Like, I love being creative. I thought, like, oh, this sounds awesome. I'm not a programmer. I'm creative. I come up with stories. And yeah, but I think, like, the main reason, and they also said that when I was hired, like, they do want me to do translation work, and I was all for it. Why not? I mean, I like working with languages. Yeah, and also to just build up, like, my expectations is they asked me to do a portfolio for them. And in this portfolio, I was supposed to write what kind of marketing tactics I would use when I started at the company. And I wrote, I think, 10 pages in Japanese on what, like, marketing, what I would
But she's
suggest.
not into, remember that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got help. I mean, I wrote down... Yes, no, but like honestly, I had Japanese friends who helped me like look through it. I wrote as best I could. And then my Japanese friends kind of corrected it for me. But I wrote that like 10 pages of like, okay, this is what I would suggest for a company that doesn't want to spend too much money on marketing. Yeah. And they didn't have a marketing division. They didn't have anyone working as a marketer in the company. So I was a bit like nervous. Okay, so what does this mean for me if I'm going to be a marketer here? And also they want me to do a portfolio where I make 2 game suggestions. So I came up with 2 ideas for games that were both really good, I have to say. For someone who's not like, who's never done it before, and I'm more like coming up with stories for comics and books. I think like when I did have some help that talked to friends what they thought would be a good idea. But anyway, I did a PowerPoint presentation on both of them, and I really thought out the story, which buttons would you press to do what is the end goal, and so on. And I photoshopped like these pictures, I drew things for it. So in my mind, based on that, I thought, well, I've done 10 pages writing on like what I would do for marketing, and then I've done 2 presentations on games I came up with, and then I was hired, and basically for half a year all I did was debugging and some translation.
How long did you work at the company?
Half a year. Because afterwards because I talked to them also. I need to clarify. It sounds like I gave up really fast, but I talked to them about this because I should also just clarify about debugging for those who don't really exactly know how it works.
Sure.
So the debugging is basically you press a button, you see, okay, does this generate the result that we want to like have? So for example, if I press this button, will this screen appear and so on? And I did that in Japanese, and they had like mobile games. So it wasn't like, playing Zelda or anything cool like that. It's like an app. Yeah.
Are you allowed to talk about the app?
Yeah, because they've released it. I'm not going to give any details because I don't want to like say which company it is, but they made gacha games, and that's like a lot of companies in Japan. And
so for those of you who don't know, what is a gacha game? Mario Kart. The new app on your phone, Mario Kart. Gacha game. How is it a gacha game, you might be asking? Because you get random items and random characters, and you have to save up to get the special coins or stars or whatever, and then you use those to use the star pipe one time to get a random character or item.
Yeah.
Gacha game.
I think that's a better explanation. You basically pay money to kind of, almost like a lottery or like something, and then you get random items. You don't know what the items are. And that's what they were doing a lot, and I'm not really that much into gacha games, to be honest. I thought the ideas they had for the apps were pretty cool, but otherwise it's just not exactly my cup of tea, and that's fine because it's not like I'm going to a game company and be like, oh, you have to do all the games that I enjoy. But it was more that I didn't do any marketing. Like when I was talking to them about it, they're like, oh, just do whatever you want. You just have to write another report and give it to your senpai, like your superior, and they will give it to this other senpai, and they will give it to Shacho, the boss, and he will look it through, and then maybe you can do this thing. But you don't get any budget, and you don't really have anyone else working on marketing that actually knows what they're doing, so that didn't make me feel confident at all. And another thing is also, when I talked about this with debugging, because it's all in Japanese, and I did not quite understand all of this, because it's not just like pressing a button, right? Because sometimes, oh, you have to be level 50 to access this page, and then you have to get this coin in order to get this ticket, in order to get this gacha. And then you have to go in the computer and manually level up in the sense of like, oh, you go this side, and then you enter this side, and you have to do that thing, and then you press this, and then you can do level up, and then you can get these things with it was crazy, and I always had to ask someone else for help me, so I felt pretty worthless. So, and I told them, when I started working here, or I was about to start, you said you had a job for me that only I could do as someone who knows several languages and with my educational background. But I ended up doing the only thing I felt anyone else could do better than me who just had better level of Japanese. But if you keep at it, Verena, in 5 years you may be able to make your own game.
The Japanese lie in Japanese culture, taught to every single person in Japan. You know, you stick with the company for 5 years, good things will happen. 10 years, good things will happen. And it's just a fake dream. You know, work hard to make someone else's dream come true.
Yeah, the thing is, like, I fully understand that I needed to kind of get some work experience, and especially since I didn't have an education within gaming, that's totally valid. But it's more like, for me, my dream was never to make my own game. My dream was to enjoy working, like a little bit, like to enjoy my work every day. Maybe some days you have days where you're not enjoying work like 100%, where you're like, ugh, I don't really want to do this. But if it's like every day for half a year where you're like just hate it, that's not a good sign. And even though people were nice and people were helpful, they were cheering me on and everything. So it was really nice, but it was just it was mismatch, I would say. Because that was not the job I thought I had applied for. I thought I would do more marketing. And when they said, oh, you have to do a little bit debugging, I didn't think they meant every day for half a year. I thought it was just going to be a little bit on the side. And I'm just someone who is creative. I love working creatively. And I thought to myself, why should I stick around and maybe debug for 5 years if I can just as well like find a job where I can be creative much sooner, even if it's not on my project. Exactly. I don't have to make my own game, but I wanted to be able to maybe help someone creatively make their game.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and you know, when it comes to work, having good work environment is only one factor in enjoying a job, right?
Yeah.
You have to be doing something that you love.
Yeah.
And if you're doing a job that you don't like and you feel like, you know, oh, I just have to deal with it or just do it, it's work.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Quit that and do something you enjoy. And
yeah.
In your case, you were promised something that you would be doing and you didn't do it, and you're just like, nope, I've had enough of that.
Yeah. I don't think they had any bad intentions, but I think like because I asked myself every day, like, why did they even hire me? Because I felt I was so much slower than anyone else at doing this debugging thing, and I slowed people down because I always had to ask questions. And I think like the conclusion I came down with was that they thought it would be convenient to have a foreigner working there to do translation work for when they needed it, and the rest of the time they didn't really know what to do with me. The rest of the time they were trying to keep me occupied, and I would ask them often like, hey, what do you want me to do today? And so I asked my senpai, who would be like, oh, okay, who was really stressed out, by the way, because everyone had so much to do except for me. Really, like everyone, you know, you hear overtime work in Japan and people were so worried, are you okay, Verena, do you have to do overtime work? I'm like, no, I barely know what to do the last 2 hours of the day.
Yeah.
And then when I asked them, hey, what do you want me to do? They have to discuss it among each other, and they're super busy. So by the time they tell me what to do, maybe half an hour or an hour has passed, and I just sit there pretending to look busy.
Yeah, and that's happened to me at 2 different startup companies that I've worked at as well.
Yeah.
And honestly, what it comes down to is just they made a mistake in hiring you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the idea is nice of like they need you, or they think they need you for a certain task, but in the reality is if they don't have an actual job for you, then they just don't need you. And I think what happens is a lot of companies kind of then maybe feel guilty, and then they don't want to fire you because they're like, oh, we're the ones that hired her. And then it just kind of becomes this kind of endless loop of they feel bad and want to try to keep you busy and give you something to do, and then you feel bad because you're not really doing anything.
Yeah. But they actually can't fire you, I think. Like, it's not that they can fire you because they have too little job for you. That was actually someone told me who has a lot more experience here in Japan, and I'm not exactly sure what the name was for the contract I got, but since it's a full-time position, they would not be able to, like, fire me unless I did something really horrible. I would have to leave.
Seishine?
Probably. maybe. This is where you put up the edit, where you like write the word that you've researched.
Well, so for those who maybe are English teachers, there's pretty much two types of English teaching jobs. One is a contract position where it's a renewed set time period, and the other one is called seishine, where it's like you're a full-time member of the company and it's not contract anymore. And that position, it's really difficult to get fired from, because if they fire you, then that means they need to pay out a lot of benefits and stuff for you to when you're having to find another job and things like that. So companies are a lot less likely to fire someone who has become that type of full-time position. So overall, if you could give like a summary of like your work experience in Japan, what advice would you give someone about this?
Oh gosh. First of all, I would give the advice to really study Japanese. Make sure you really know the language, because the more you know like the language, the better the chances are you'll actually get a fun job.
True.
And because then they'll trust you with other things. Because one of my friends, who's doing an internship here, he has the same problem that I had, and he doesn't really get to do any real job. They just try to keep him busy, basically. So really, it's a language barrier. So really, if you want to have a fun job that isn't English teaching, English teaching, I think it's fine. But you really want to go to a Japanese company and doing something else that's not related to English. No Japanese. And yeah, I think that's it, because I mean, I did ask them so many questions before I started there, and it still didn't turn out quite right.
True.
So
And
maybe research the company too.
Yes. So what I was going to say about researching for companies is not only is speaking Japanese good for joining Japanese companies, but also for foreign companies. I see lots of ads for, Crunchyroll or Google or, Rakuten or Apple. Like, there's so many large companies that are from the States or other countries in Europe, in Japan, that you can work at with knowing Japanese, and that just really helps you get the foot in the door for that.
Yeah, another thing is that most companies require you to have at least N2, JLPT. So, and I would say, like, try to speak even better than N2. It's not really important to pass, like, I think, okay, knowing a lot of kanji is good. JLPT, I don't think it necessarily tells you how good you are at Japanese, because there are some people that know kanji because maybe they're Chinese, and they can pass it really easily. But sometimes their speaking skills are not up to par with their reading skills.
Yeah.
Not always. I mean, some of them are just killing it, of course. But just heads up that no matter what you think of JLPT in itself, companies do require you passing N2. I was just lucky that my company was kind of being like, it's okay. We know that you're kind of N2 level.
And going off that as well, like, if you're good at interviews, you can put down on your resume N2 even if you haven't passed it, and as long as you can, put your money where your mouth is and like prove like how good your Japanese is, even without taking the test, they still might accept you just based on that alone if you can really sell it.
Yeah, I don't think I ever had to show my certificate.
Yeah.
Oh. So. Now that you mention it, I feel a bit tricked. Okay. Yeah.
I'm teaching you something you didn't know. So, that's working in Japan. Huge topic right there in itself. And we could keep going on about this for a few more hours too. But what about your experience living in Japan? So you said this isn't the first time you've come to Japan?
Yeah.
So in both instances, what has been your experience moving to Japan, or, moving to a different place, or just, living in Japan in general?